everybody on the beautiful words of YouTube. This is your Uncle Welcome here, and today we are taking a look at a 1960s haunted house story from the Great Britain that is a little bit more than just a spooky tale. I'm talking about The Innocents. In this movie, we follow a governess named Miss Giddens who has moved out to a mansion to help two orphan kids living there all by themselves with the servant people because their uncle doesn't have time for them. But when she arrives, she gets this kind of off-putting feeling of that something's not right here. The kids and the servants are hiding something, and why does it feel like someone is always watching me? It always almost feels like it's haunted, you could say. Now, this is a movie I only stumbled upon because Martin Scorsese said it was one of his 10 favorite horror films ever made, and also I have a book at home, which I used to call my Bible. I loved to read the book all the time years ago, called 101 Horror Films You Should Watch, and this was one of the movies that was featured in it. But otherwise, I very rarely, or I probably never heard anyone talk about this movie or praising it, which is a shame because I think this is the most underrated and overlooked horror film to be created. I think this is, for being what it is in the genre, it is just a fantastic film that hit every single high note that a horror film should hit. The movie is suspenseful, it is scary, it is dramatic and emotional, and it never lets up. It also isn't littered with jump scares or flashy effects because this was in the early 60s and it was made in Great Britain, so they were very sparse with those elements, which makes the movie timeless. Compare this to something like Psycho, which also is a classic horror film, a fantastic horror film everyone should watch. Psycho still has its elements that becomes a little bit goofy or cheesy or campy, you could say, in nowadays movie culture, because yeah, the movie is aged. The movie was released in 1960, so of course things are going to age. But in The Innocents, very few things have actually aged bad. I think even when the effects are used, they still feel believable enough and doesn't feel too cheesy or campy or old school. They actually work. In this movie, we have Deborah Kerr, who plays the governess, and she does a tremendous job. She actually has said it herself that this was her favorite performance, the one she was most proud of, and I can definitely see why. This is a performance that starts off on a very quiet and somber note. She's kind of like this innocent girl who just wants to help out these kids. She's very nice, treats them very well, just want to help them out. But she gets kind of more and more slippery down the slope of insanity. But at the same time, you don't know if is she going insane or if there's actually something wrong with the house, or maybe even the kids, the innocent little children. And also this movie has this setting and landscape that just makes this movie so spooky, because I think that is what this movie, it kind of misguides you, because yes, it is set in a mansion in the late 1800s in England, which means that some people think, oh, it's going to be like a standard spooky haunted house story, but it really isn't. But having that setting and landscape also gives you this kind of classic spooky story vibe that adds to it, because then the movie also kind of goes in a different direction and will surprise you, to say the least, with what it has to offer. I think overall also the child acting in this movie is phenomenal. There are sometimes that I do think they are overacting and the kids go into a little bit over the top territory. But keep in mind, this movie was released back in 1960s, and that's probably the thing that's aged the worst with this movie, is the child acting at parts. But mostly I think the child actors did a tremendous job for what they were offered to do, and what they do go in this movie, it is a little bit, like I say, this is a movie before its time, to say the least. And what I think the child actors does so good in this movie, the ones playing Miles and Flora, is that they have this innocent look to them that makes you wonder how innocent they really are. You know, they kind of feels like there's a sinister undertone in their behavior and their actions and reactions to things that makes you just be on the off-putting vibe, just as Deborah Kerr's character is in this movie. You kind of relate to her because you never really get what the kids are about and why they are so strange, to say the least, in how they behave. And the movie very much has a somber and quiet vibe that builds up into this kind of creepy, spooky and scary atmosphere. It's not even necessarily a movie that's supposed to scare the living shit out of you, but it's more actually a kind of thought-provoking horror film, which is why this movie probably didn't become an instant classic or something. Because Psycho definitely also had its thought-provoking themes and did some incredible stuff for being the 1960s, but I think The Innocents does it in a way more like subdued and quiet way, and doesn't just shove it in your face and have a twist kind of explain everything to you. Even though there are some scenes in this movie that are a little bit exposition heavy and feels like a little bit too self-explanatory, like, okay, we get it. Back in the days, I actually think the audience didn't get it if those scenes weren't there. Because sometimes the character of Miss Giddens very much explains what she's thinking and where she's kind of heading, instead of we just kind of following with her and then see what's going to happen. She just kind of explains it out loud, which sometimes can feel like, it's a little much, but it's not. But that's like the only real issue I have with this movie, because otherwise it's such a creepy tale that just amps up in a slow but very creepy and spooky pace. And the vibe and atmosphere at this mansion with these kids that you don't know where you have them, you don't know what they're about, and you don't know what they're up to, it just kind of creeps you out. There's a fantastic scene where Deborah Kerr walks up in the middle of the night because she hears noises and walks around with a candlestick. And many people say, well, that just sounds like a standard scene out of any horror movie. Well, the way Innocent does it is that it actually reveals quite a lot about what's going on, about the kind of haunting, or is there a haunting at his house or not. And what's going on in that scene kind of explains a lot about what this movie wants to achieve and what this movie wants to push forward, which is a narrative of, is this just in her mind, or are there actually some darker, sinister stuff that has happened here that won't leave? There's a very dark, subdued, and tragic undertone and theme running through this horror film that actually makes it like a lot to take in at the first time. Because I saw this first time when I was like 12, I believe, and I thought it was really good even back then. But rewatching it now, there were so many things that I picked up on that I didn't understand back then, because I wasn't as experienced, I wasn't as clever or smart to pick up on those details, but now I do, and I kind of see what they are leaning towards to with the narrative and the theme in this movie. And also the movie just has this song that is played throughout this movie, or sung throughout this movie by the kids, and it's called Oh Willow Whaley. Apparently it was written for this movie, and it is just phenomenal what a song it is. It is just one of those creepy ass songs sung by kids, but it actually kind of foreshadows what this movie is about if you listen closely to the lyrics. Because in the beginning it's just a pitch black screen actually, and we hear, I believe it's Flora, the girl who's singing the song to us, and it foreshadows a little bit what the movie is about and what journey it will take you, or what journey it will bring you on. Because like I said, it is not a standard haunted house story here, and it's very much up to your own interpretation if you will see this as a haunted house story, or if you see it like a psychological drama, or kind of both actually. Because I think this is a movie that it has never really been fully explained, and it's also based on a novel written in the late 1800s, so it hasn't really never been explained exactly what the author, and in this case the director's, intent of what the story is supposed to be and what it really is hasn't never been fully explained. So it's very much up to your own imagination, and I think that is also what makes this movie scary, because a lot of this movie is like how you see these scenes, because these scenes can be viewed in very different ways, and I think that is what makes this movie such a phenomenal, and I would say timeless classic that everyone should watch. And also the movie just has this song that is played throughout this movie, or sung throughout this movie by the kids, and it's called Oh Willow Whaley. Apparently it was written for this movie, and it is just phenomenal what a song it is. It is just one of those creepy ass songs sung by kids, but it actually kind of foreshadows what this movie is about if you listen closely to the lyrics. Because in the beginning it's just a pitch black screen actually, and we hear, I believe it's Flora, the girl who's singing the song to us, and it foreshadows a little bit what the movie is about and what journey it will take you, or what journey it will bring you on, because like I said, it is not a standard haunted house story here, and it's very much up to your own interpretation if you will see this as a haunted house story, or if you see it like a psychological drama, or kind of both actually, because I think this is a movie that it has never really been fully explained, and it's also based on a novel written in the late 1800s. So it hasn't really never been explained exactly what the author, and in this case the director's, intent of what the story is supposed to be and what it really is hasn't never been fully explained. So it's very much up to your own imagination, and I think that is also what makes this movie scary, because a lot of this movie is like how you see these scenes, because these scenes can be viewed in very different ways, and I think that is what makes this movie such a phenomenal, and I would say timeless classic that everyone should watch. A layered haunted house story that goes into some uncharted territory and was a product way before its time, and still stands up as probably the most underrated and overlooked horror film to be created. I'm giving The Innocents a solid 10 out of 10.